Thanks everybody for coming out. It's great to be out here at this conference. It's spectacular, I think. Hopefully you guys are finding the day pretty good too. I'm going to try and go through this, relatively painlessly here, and maybe get some more time to ask questions at the end. So who am I? My name's Gabe Arnett. I'm a senior director. I work at Moodys Analytics. I've been doing technology for way too long. I like to think that I'm not as old as I am most of the time. I'm currently working around changing up our search application for our forward-facing suite of applications that deliver ratings and relevant financial content to our customer base. Obviously, we've been using Dekka for a little less than a decade, have learned some challenges there, and have been playing around with the what do we go to next for a couple of years. Being a big enterprise, it takes us a lot of time to figure that out. And then unraveling that, we sort of uncovered lots of problems with our data and decided we should fix that too while we're at it. So basically everything we're doing is with Lucidworks Fusion. Currently, we played around with Lucidworks Search prior to that. So real quick, don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. Moodys Analytics, if you don't know who Moodys is, we are one of the 3 credit rating agencies that deal primarily in fixed income space. We've had some ups and downs, obviously, over the years. Moodys Analytics is a separate arm of Moodys. We are not involved in the ratings business, but we are the arm that distributes the ratings to the global marketplace. Relatively big company. You can do your homework later if you're really that interested in who we are. Been around for 100 plus years, not going anywhere. So let's get into the meat of this. I love this slide because when we first started tackling search and why we're doing anything around search, it was great to go back into the Wayback Machine and find our web presence. And I think this is somewhere around 2005, maybe 2004, before we had search. And if you can read that screen, some of those old words like webmaster are on there, and it basically wasn't implemented at all. Not a big surprise there, right? So today, our, Moodys.com facing web presence has really the basics of search. We've distributed it across tabs, depending on what type of data you're looking for. Most of our end users are looking for ratings for a specific entity or instrument, or maybe a piece of research. We have your typical guided navigation facets on the left-hand side, your typical, web interface. That's all powered by Dekka. So if you've had any experience with Dekka, this is the fabulous out-of-the-box Dekka reference app. Quite frankly, years ago when we first did this was gangbusters because good luck trying to see anything visually in Dekka. This helped us a lot. Still helps today. You can do a lot of troubleshooting, a lot of analysis within this tool. It really helps you to find a lot of problems. It's clunky, but it works, right? You can even fire Dekka query language EQL statements directly in here, which is basically glorified XPath. So enough of that. I don't really like to blame Dekka. I like to blame myself and several other architects that put Dekka in place, and then not so much that we put Dekka in place, but we didn't really change Dekka. So I'm proud to say that we're running the last stable version of Dekka prior to Oracle's buyout of Dekka, which has been end of life for a number of years. And we've been paying maintenance for that as well, and obviously tweaked it and made some changes along the way, but again, that's not Dekka's fault. That's really our fault, right? So basically, this is the idea behind what we started with. It was a search engine, then we got really clever and said, oh, well, it's more than a search engine. We can put everything in there. And you'll hear Grant this morning, and I've heard Grant tell me a number of times that there's not really anything wrong with loading all your data in Solr, but there's a lot of things wrong with loading all your data and making it an authoritative source in Dekka. Really bad idea. So there's no join capability, as I said, XPath, no real great performance gains or anything else. It's clunky. If you take anything out, you have to put it back in exactly as it is, or else in Dekka will miss fields and will drop fields and all sorts of fun stuff. It's difficult to span and integrate outside of that. It's just a bad idea, right? So if you're thinking about it, don't do it. In Solr, absolutely. There's nothing stopping you there. Like I said, no joins leads to a poor data model. I'll give you a couple examples without boring you too much. If you know anything about fixed income, if you don't, this may make sense or not. But so we have a concept of an entity, an organization that issues debt. We have a separate record for debt and a separate record for an organization. Obviously, metadata for each is very different, but because we can't do joins, we load all of the data collectively in each other. So a debt could belong to a number of organizations, let's say 1,000. I have 1,000 org IDs in the debt record. In the organization record, I have maybe to 30,000 debts. I have all those debt IDs in the org record, along with all various flavors of metadata like coupon type and maturities and all those things. So it's pretty bloated and redundant, and that leads to a really big bloated index, and that leads to really bad performance and really bad scale and a big nightmare. Not to mention the fact that our indexing and query performance is really abysmal. Query performance, you know, we're definitely, our end user base isn't the savviest, but one of their biggest complaints is how slow it is, right? We've obviously tuned a lot of things and made it a little better, gotten clever with caching and whatnot. Ironically, the index server is in memory cache, but when it's 100 plus gigs, it doesn't really help you too much. Indexing takes a lot of time. We run jobs. We pretty much do a weekly baseline. We used to do a nightly baseline. That baseline job, as I said, to crunch and change data, like convert dates into ints for proper sorting, because Dekka can't really deal with sorting of a date, because a date doesn't exist as a field type in Dekka. Really led to, on average, about a 15 to 18 hour job every day, which is a lot of fun, right? If you're babysitting this, and we have several people that babysit it, I've even gone through employees who just couldn't deal with it anymore. But needless to say, it's just not fun. Again, not Dekka's fault, our fault. It's also an architectural dinosaur. As I said, we're using the, I don't even know, I've lost count of the years of the supported release dates of the version of Dekka we're using. The fault tolerance is really bad, and Dekka's really sensitive. If any little part of its job sort of has a hiccup, the whole thing fails and falls over. And there's no recovery point when that happens, so you just have to hope and pray that when you kick it back in, that whatever was queued that didn't get gobbled up gets reprocessed. From time to time, we have stuff that got fallen through the cracks, and we have to manually inject it back through. It's really disk heavy. We are currently running our production infrastructure on this in bare metal, which is weird to say these days. Not in the cloud. Ironically, Dekka would have worked a lot better on VMware back in the day, and still today works better on VMware. Really bad job of memory management. It doesn't recycle itself. The indexes, if it starts getting too much volume going against it, it adds up, and then it just dies and fails, and with very little warning. So we've had to build a lot of log analysis capabilities. Ironically, we use Splunk, and I noticed Splunk Live is here today. A lot of that we do early detection. It's still a bit reactive, and we've had to write our own custom logic to go back and fire a job that restarts it and does everything else. And it's pretty bulky. I've got a better slide later on that sort of infers how bulky that is. So not to mention the fact that we are an Agile shop, but it's very hard to be Agile with this. Any changes to this are really time-consuming and can be pretty painful. Developing in the Dekka workbench and all those tools is a bit like a clunky SSIS or ETL tool. There's not really any sandboxing. You can do some tests, and if you're testing in an environment and you make a change that's detrimental to the rest of it, you sort of hose your entire thing, and you better hope you have good source control. It always requires development, and when I mean development, I mean real developers. Regression testing, always, because it is everything. And as I said, it is our primary data store, so it's everything. You make any changes to it whatsoever, too bad, you got to regression test it. We do roughly a month worth of nonsense to it back in the day. Earlier this year, we just finally said, that's enough. We're going to actively get off of this thing now. No more new things are going in here. If you're making any change whatsoever, it better be for lights on. So that's been better, and then obviously moving in the right direction. And the timing couldn't be better because, you know, of advancements in technology specifically around Solr. So like I said before, the clunkiness, and Dekka has what's called an ITL machine. That's its indexer. That's where the writes are happening. It is not parallelizable unless you separate your indexes out, and then that gets really even more painful. We played around with that early on, and even in Dekka was like, no, don't do that, that's nuts. So we have a single index. When that thing dies, the whole thing shuts down. If you want to count all those, feel free to count those, but that is the accurate count, by the way, of our front-end index reads. That supports, you know, really only 400,000 page views, which isn't that big of a website, and that's across our application. So if you want to get clever and say, well, then it's even smaller when you think website plus our 2 different tablet apps, plus our smartphone, plus our web services, plus our Excel add-in. It's really not a whole lot of traffic. So why do I need all that, right? Again, clunky. Our average time to the web is around 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the load of the change. So if we have a busy day in the rating space and we, God forbid, decided to downgrade the US, the system would fall down on its face and would not be good, and I'd probably be asking many of you for a job. Not going to happen. So our partials run every 4 minutes. That's basically a need, and we found a sweet spot around how much activity the rating space has and how many changes happen. Obviously, we uncovered a lot of problems in our data management space with this because in reality, our systems were archaic upstream, that when we were triggering a change that wasn't actually a change. It was things like the coupon type changed or maturity date, which changes all the time during nightly jobs and other things. That wasn't really triggering a big significant thing, but it was adding up to volume. So it was pretty clunky, and we're trying to fix that now to get that better and be smarter. Like I said, within Dekka, there's no concept of a delta. If you change a record, you have to give it the entire complete record, even if one field out of 150 were changed, you have to give all 150 back. So obviously it's time to change. Our user experience analysis is bad. Thankfully, we are needed. It's not a choice. Most of the investment universe needs our information, and we give them various channels to consume that from, but they all sort of suffer the same problem because Dekka is the back end. So obviously we have to change. People are not really going to flee, but they're not happy, and it's harder to have a pricing event and obviously make more money, which we all like to do. And thanks to Google over the years, everybody expects Google-like precision and Google-like speed, including myself. So I don't even use the website. So how are we going to change? We've been playing with Lucidworks, like I said. I've been playing with Fusion since Fusion came out. I've been an active part of helping them evolve it to a degree, or I like to think that they've listened to me and made some changes. It's really, and honestly, this isn't a joke, it is really the easy button for us. If you haven't played with it, I highly recommend you look at it. It can be a little bit of a curve if you're a developer. It's tough to bridge this gap and say, well, now everything's in a GUI, you don't need a developer to do this, which is great because you should turn this over to the hands of the people that make those decisions, the search analysts and our business analysts and the people that drive our use cases and our business itself, right? The knowledge is within them. And for a long time, that translation of their bits to the developers gets lost, like we've all done, right? It's usually pretty close, but not the best. So time to market is faster, changes are faster, they're very evolutionary, it's quick. No more developer resources, very little. Namely, most of our developer resources are around the prep of the data, and then support with the connectors, the connection string's not right, or the data value you put in the store isn't correct or whatnot. So it's very easy. On the outside of that, our middleware services team just interacts with the out-of-the-box API from Fusion, call it a day. We've obviously toyed around with the idea of why write another layer calling their layer and put it directly, but we learned that the hard way within Dekka. It's a lot of heartache to replace that layer, and so rather than replace that layer again, we could replace Fusion if we ever wanted to later on. So that's really it for the developers. So some of the other best things about this, there's a single administration configuration management interface. The interface is great. If they could slow down on making the changes they've made to it over the few releases, it would be great because you get used to it and then, whoa, we changed it again. But they changed it for the better. So when you get past the change fact, you can index data in clicks. Literally when we went and did POCs, I crawled the same record sets, same data. We didn't change the model. We didn't change anything. It's roughly around 16 million plus records. I was able to crawl those and configure Lucidworks Fusion to crawl them, test them, go under the hood and change some of the field schema types, and then write the query pipelines. And in a couple of cases, it was like a half an hour, 45 minutes, versus days, weeks, months, quarters, development cycles. And not just me. Lots of business people I've turned on to this have been able to do this. Ironically, in the training class yesterday, one of them had some problems, but and then another beautiful bit is you can see the search analytics. If they spend a lot of time on an analytics interface, that allows you to really get in there and really start tuning this and mining it, and it opens up that door to certain people to say, well, wait a minute, I've used to had to go back in and get somebody to run a report against Splunk against our request logs, and then that took forever and a day to try and figure it out, and by the time you did it, we've already missed the trend. It was the typical thing, why is all the traffic happening on Moodys.com right now? You'd literally have to go to the ratings news feed to see who we took an action on and maybe then correlate that to whatever was happening. And we were pretty much dead wrong most of the time on those situations. Sometimes it wasn't, like Grant said, the Oprah effect. It was just an anomaly. The scale factor is fabulous. I've got another slide to show you what I mean by that scale change and difference. And it's really robust and simple. It is really that easy. So now what we've been building, and this is pretty much production, and quite frankly, it's a little bit of overkill. We have 2 Fusion nodes, and 2 because we like to be fault tolerant. We like to have HA, and we like to not have a hot-cold disaster recovery situation, even though we still have it too. So everything we have here, we have cold somewhere else. We have 5 Solr nodes right now. I'm only using 2 of them, and I'm only using 2 of them because I split the collection versus the signals and the aggregation collections that come with this. We're gonna use a couple more now that we're realizing that we can load all that data back in there after we've cleaned it up, even though we're not searching against it, even though we're not returning it in a search result. But the power that we get from analytics and the power of Solr to run queries faster and better to unearth new meaning and new insight from our data is much easier there. And even easier than Mongo or Couchbase or any of the other SQL stores that are out there. Although Couchbase 4 and Nickel, it's a toss-up. But we currently are crawling the data set in MongoDB. It's, I think it's about a 5-node cluster of Mongo. We're evaluating Couchbase to see if it's better. Obviously, we have some scaling challenges and some throughput challenges with Mongo. It's a, but for whatever reason it works. The Couchbase connector for Lucidworks is great. It's as fast and as efficient as the oplog feature in Mongo. So basically, you change a record in Mongo collection, it's near instantaneous in the index in Solr. Most of that is due to the fact that our index and our record size is pretty small. It's around 16 million, which is nothing in the scheme of things. 10 years ago, I'd have said, "Oh, that's crazy." That's about 100 gigs. 100 gigs is nothing now. So obviously, we've cleaned things up. we decided let's not put everything in there like in Dekka. If it's searched against, if you're matching the keyword against any of the fields and or they are being returned in a result set, put them in there. Otherwise, don't put them in there. We've subsequently changed that to say, well, it doesn't matter, let's put it all in there, but we're not going to make it an authoritative store, so it's just another operational data store, just like Mongo and Couchbase is. Obviously, garbage in, garbage out, so that's why we're focused now on cleaning up the garbage and making it better. Time to the web, near instantaneous, is very fast, and we're able to support the same load and then even more. So we're still pushing that envelope. We're doing a complete overhaul of most of our application space, and we're starting to get into deeper analytics possibilities with the data that we're providing. We've got projects to start doing relationships better, not just simple family trees of organizations, but showing the full balance sheet and footprint of an entity, which is not the easiest thing to do. It isn't as trivial as you might think. And I think we're already seeing some value of having this in there and the scale factors and the query factors of it. Next, we are playing around with the recommendation capabilities of Fusion. It's got a strong feature of signals, which allows you to capture all kinds of events, which I'm sure if you've listened to any of the other Lucidworks presentations and whatnot, it's great. It's a little bit daunting because the documentation has been subpar to a degree. The upside of that is for myself and a couple of our engineers, we love to take things apart and put them back together. I'd rather not read. I'd rather go and kick its tires. Once you get past that curve and you realize the power of this, it's pretty significant. So for us, every query get results in a post back to the signals collection of the event that the user was doing. We have a prototype POC that I'm unfortunately not going to be able to show because we've got a few bugs, and I don't like to do demos at conferences when things are buggy because it will inevitably be buggy during this presentation. But I'm happy to talk to you about it offline. Basically what we're doing is merging in our user data and down to the profiles of the types of user, matching it with their portfolios that they have of the various cross segments and instruments, geographical, their authorization levels. We obviously have GAM accounts like JP Morgan, and then we have small Main Street banks, so that's a very different experience for them. But tying that together and trying to do it at real time has been our biggest hurdle of fixing that. And we've been doing a lot of that offline and outside of Fusion, and then realizing, oh wait, we could do this in Fusion, let's try it. So it's pretty powerful. We're still not quite 100% convinced that it's great, and quite frankly, I think a lot of the deeper stuff we're going to want to do is too heavy that we're going to have to do it offline anyway, and we probably should, because it's not really that necessary to be real time. But today we don't do any recommendation. So we offer a guided sort of browse by feature, and then obviously the basic search feature. We do a little bit of the redirection with Dekka's capability there. So if you type in a QSIP, we're not going to give you a list of things back. We're going to take you right to that page where the QSIP information is in the org. That's very easy to do in Fusion. So it wasn't, we had to write a bunch of code and do some craziness on our back end side to figure that out within Dekka. Fusion, it's easy. Analytic capabilities. So we're looking at it now as let's not just do this for the website. Let's now throw our web analytics data at it. Let's throw our Salesforce data in there. Let's throw all of our data sets. So obviously ratings is the #1 data set we've got, but we collect data from Thomson Reuters, from Bloomberg, from Market, Toilette Prevon, all kinds of people. I think it's about 21, 22 different data sources of financial information. A lot of that is very historic. Our WorldScope file is a flat file database, if any of you have been around long enough to know what that looks like. A lot of pain in parsing that and actually throwing that and crawling that raw physical file with Solr and Fusion, it was no-brainer. We didn't really need to do any ETL at all. Just some simple parsing, and I actually wrote a JavaScript thing that just cranks it out and does a great job of that. And then obviously the question mark is there. We don't know what else. I think that it can do a lot of other things, and we're going to see if we can't try that out and see what we can do with it. Anyway, with that said, my contact details, and I'm here today, tomorrow, happy to talk to anybody. And I'm sorry that I didn't have the demo. I could go into a little bit of it, but it would be just the stuff we did in class yesterday with a basic data set. But I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have right now.
How do we implement the experience manager to automate the...
So you are asking me a great question. However, we don't use that feature in Dekka today. Yeah. No, literally, I'm not kidding. The 6.1.3 is the version we're running. And we never really scratched the surface. And the biggest thing that we had a hurdle with was the concept of the dimensions. Our taxonomy is literally interacted with and ingested into the Dekka engine. And you know, everything that we interact with our taxonomy is done through Dekka. That's been sort of a challenge for us. I mean, we spent a couple of months of whiteboarding and trying to figure out how best to do that. Obviously, we tried doing it in Solr and Fusion during the index pipeline and just merge it and marry it, but the performance lag was so bad that it wasn't worth it. So it just made sense to do that enhancement outside of this during our data flow ETL processes outside of our data prep stage. We're now realizing that that's really powerful, and we can do even more outside of that, and we converted it, and we now have a taxonomy as a service. So even our customers that might want to interact with our ontology, which, quite frankly, when we got under the hood, isn't really that unique to us, and then we realized, hey, there's other libraries out there that, you know, I'll give you an example, region. Why did we come up with our own region? Because that's just silly. So those kind of things were the biggest challenges we had. Obviously, wrapping our heads around the change and the terminology change was the biggest. But literally, one for one, our search interfaces that we have in Dekka were easy to build. There's some performance lags in Dekka that we had to accommodate, and those performance lags are gone in Solr and Fusion. Things like we had to create a separate type ahead search interface for our type ahead from the main search. Our developers have realized, well, even though we built them that way, we did the performance stress testing and it showed no difference. So you just have one search interface that does all of them and call it a day. And then we're starting to realize, well, with this, now we can get more powerful and our type ahead can show the facet counts within it. We can do recommendations on that type ahead, make it more of a suggest rather than a, you know, the simple, boring. I think today what we do is the first character we're matching across ticker, and then the next three matches the organization's name, and there goes across the previous names for M&As, the aliases of these names. Some of these, you know, like Ford, there are probably 38 different variations of the Ford name, and they are actual different entities in Ford. They're not one, and they're all separately rated, so it's kind of a challenge for us to do that. But you know, to answer your original question, no, we don't. We didn't have to deal with that. The dimensions was our biggest problem.
So you lied in structure and...
Parallel. Yeah, we don't like to. This is about a $700 million revenue generating application space. Our customers are really sensitive, not to mention the regulations we're under. So we don't like to make too many drastic changes that might impact or differentiate the rating itself. Obviously, you can't really change the value, but if you change the way it's looked at and displayed, shockingly enough, people are confused enough by that they're like, oh, the rating was wrong. But yeah, we're hopefully flipping that switch in maybe 6 months. We're starting to gradually flip the switch on small things like type ahead. We're moving that to be real and seeing some gains already. We've been doing a lot of testing and analysis with our customers and seeing what that looks like. We've been doing a hell of a lot of internal testing where, you know, for most of it, it was, let's try this, and it was too good to be true, that we obviously were like, no, that can't be that good. Like, something's wrong. Let's break it apart and figure that out. So that was really it. We have version 2.0 and 2.1. 2.0 has some bizarre bugs in the UI, not with the product, but just weird, like, you know, there's a shadow edits that are happening, which makes it confusing. You create a new field in there, and then you look, and it's still you add another one, and it's still the same one, so you have to be clever with it, but they're minor issues. We were doing a lot of everything in the previous 1.4, I think it was. Very different interface. Some of it good, some of it eh. The changes from 1.4 to 2 were good enough for us that we moved. Obviously, we're only in parallel, so we can keep up with their changes. Part of our challenge is going to be keeping up with that once we are really live, and not repeating the same problem that we created within Dekka, where in 5 years I'm not standing up at somebody else's conference talking about how bad Lucidworks Fusion is, and it's really us. So yeah, that can be a challenge. It's a little bit different. I mean, obviously within Dekka changes, it was a big nightmare to change. You have to deploy the entire thing and then basically rebuild it and do a bunch of fun stuff, which isn't all that fun. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's pretty simple. In the class yesterday, I've heard that they're going to give automation scripts soon. I hope really soon, because that'll help tremendously. But yeah, anyway, anybody else? Yep. Yes. So our primary collection store that we're consuming from is Mongo Collections. There's, I think, about 20 plus different collections in Mongo, varying in length and size. I think debt is about 1.5 million records alone, and the debt count of the fields is, I mean, there's roughly 300 plus fields that can be in there. So that was where we thought we were going to have problems, and that we were going to have to break that apart a little bit better. We did break it apart and got rid of the unnecessarily duplication of data, but it hasn't been a problem whatsoever to date. But using the oplog feature in Mongo, and there's an oplog setting in the Fusion connector that literally, it's a real-time connection. The Couchbase one is no different. It uses their XCDR replication factor, so literally is spoofing a Couchbase node inside of this Fusion farm, virtualized it. It is no different in testing when it's about the same speed. For us, we're looking at Couchbase more outside of search and whatnot as an NoSQL store. It has a little bit more robust factor. We can do less Couchbase than we can with Mongo. And obviously with Couchbase's new features of Nickel, there's a SQL language for it, which you can use your imagination. I got a lot of guys longer in the tooth than me that write SQL, don't really want to learn anything new, so it helps, but that's for another conference. Anything else? Sure. Too many to count. In fact, there's a lot in there that I wish I had a use for. They've built a lot of connectors for a lot of different things. I think if you have something that's not in there, they'd be interested to hear about it. But chances are good they've got it. We also have a SharePoint document library and SharePoint lists, and the SharePoint connector that they built is originally one of the first things that I found Lucidworks for, because that's really hard to write. And it's like clicks, and I'm done. And I'm crawling it. And you can write the XML transformer job in there to get rid of all the other garbage that SharePoint creates for a list item. There's a lot of clunk that you don't need that's specific to SharePoint, but I mean, that was one of the biggest bangs for the buck right there. That would saved us probably 6 months of work. Anybody else? All right, thank you guys.